Hello, everyone, and welcome to another edition of my podcast, Grit Stories of Resilience. This one today is a little bit different from what I've done in the past. It's got some grit and it's got a heck of a lot of resilience in it. But it's also going to be not just for a podcast, but because I think it's going to be so good that I'm going to offer it to lawyers and paralegals for credit. And so it will serve a double purpose. My co-conspirator today, my good friend Todd Boufford. I've known Todd for about 10 years when we lived near each other in Raleigh. He has been a great friend, helping me out when I lived near him. If something were broken, he came over and fixed it. The TV wasn't working. He knew how to do that, all sorts of things like that. He's the guy you want to live next door to. Todd has been involved with technology in the healthcare services for a number of years. And then about 4 or 5 years ago, I think 4 years at least, joined Dogwood State Bank, which is headquartered in Raleigh, but with branches in many other locations around the state and other places, as Senior Vice President for Technology and Innovation. He has agreed to come on and speak with us today about technology, scams, how you get in trouble, how you get out of trouble. Todd,
Mhm.
welcome to this program today. Thanks for being here.
Yeah, no worries, Jim. Yeah, glad to be here.
I told Todd before we started that I would first tell you my story. So many of my programs begin, unfortunately, with my story. This is a new one you haven't heard before. A few months ago, I got an email from a security firm for computers. And I thought that I had an account with them, but I did not. And they said, thanks for signing up again for us this year. We just charged your account $395, but you have 24 hours to cancel that if you call this number. So I called the number. That's the first mistake. I called the number, talked to this lovely lady who said her whole goal in life was just to help me out that day. So that endeared me to her. It took longer than I thought. And they finally asked me how much money uh, they thought I needed to be canceled. And they said, put it in round numbers. So I put in the figure $400, which automatically went to $4,000. That I didn't put in 4,000. That's what it came to. They said, oh my God, we have sent $4,000 to your account. Check it. I didn't believe them. I did not believe them. They said, check your bank account and see. So I opened up my bank account. Sure enough, I had $4,000 in there, or so I thought. Then I needed to repay it quickly because the guy who was talking to me said, oh, he was in much trouble for having messed this up. The only way he could do it quickly was if I went and bought some gift cards to send them back to him. Well, I was desperate to help him. I believe the money was there. So I go to Apple, which is not far from where I live. Well, then said I need 4 gift cards at $500 a piece. They said, don't do this. Don't do this. This is a scam. I said, no, it can't be a scam. I've got this money in my account. It can't be a scam. And they sold them to me. And I got back in my car, sat in the parking lot at Crabtree Valley, and in 15 minutes had sent them $2,000. I was off my way then to Target to get more money, more gift cards. About this time, Wells Fargo calls me and says, Mr. Blackburn, you need to stop. This is not real. I said, and I told them just what I've told you. They said, there's been no such deposit in your account today. You have just taken $2,000 out of your bank account now. The upshot of it was I got back on the phone with the guy who was following me around by phone. And I told him, I can't tell you on this program what I said to him, but it was not nice. I had several expletives deleted and hung the phone up. After that, I went through 2 or 3 weeks of bank changes, reporting it, the fraud section, closing bank accounts, changing passwords, getting new bank accounts. But as the banker said, we can't restore the $2,000, Jim, because it's so rampant. We'd go broke, not go broke, but we'd lose a lot of money if we did that. So I felt somewhat like a fool. And so for lawyers, this could happen to them. It could happen to somebody on their staff. It could happen to their clients. And then in addition, as I told Todd just the other day, last week, a lawyer from Winston-Salem sends me an email in which he says, open up this financial bank statement. Well, there's no reason for him to send me such a thing. He's been one of my friends and comes to my seminars. So I didn't open it. I wrote him an email. Did you send this? Immediately I got an email back. Yes, I did. So I thought, well, I ought to call him just to be sure. And I called his number, his direct line. It went to a restaurant. I think it went to the Village Tavern in Winston-Salem.
Great food.
Great food. It's great. I go there all the time. It's a great restaurant. And they have a good one in Raleigh. Anyway, that made no sense to me. So I was in my car and I decided I would call his other number, which I had stored in my cell phone. And that was he wasn't there, but it was a different phone number from the one in the email. I finally got a hold of him. His email had been hacked. And they wanted to get me to open up that financial statement so they could walk into my account. So I tell all this to Todd. I need to say also, I went to Best Buy to the Geek Squad for help on my computer. They said they had fixed it. They had not. They couldn't figure out how to do it, but they assured me they had. I gave my computer to Todd, and he had fixed it within an hour or an hour and a half and determined that the bad actors came from India and could trace it to where they were, almost to the same town where they were. So Todd needs to talk with you to let you know about that and how to protect yourself going forward.
Yeah, for
Is that
sure.
about it, Todd?
That pretty much covers it. Yeah, you went through the ringer, my friend, for sure. So yeah, we can
As I've
certainly
told
talk
you, I
about it.
feel really stupid doing this, but what were the warning signs that I should have looked for, beginning with the
Yeah,
very beginning?
yeah, for sure. Initially, definitely the email address, right? These emails that are going out that are scam related, a lot of them are now being caught, but a lot of them still are not, right? So I think one of the first things that you had mentioned was that you had gotten an email in regards to software that you really had never had. Oftentimes, what these individuals will do is target well-known products. So your Nortons, your McAfee, right? Things that you more than likely may have on your computer for, let's say, for an antivirus product is always a big one, right? So they will send along, just kind of push these out. Once your email address, let's say your personal or your business email address gets on a list, it will, be spammed, and a lot of those spam emails are actually scam related. And with that, in your case, warning sign number one would have been to basically check that email address, right? Often what happens with these guys is depending on who they're targeting, they may create an actual domain name that's similar to the product that they're offering, right? So something McAfee-ish or something Norton-ish that they will send that email from. So if you did happen to glance at that email, you might say, hey, that's legitimate.
I think it was Norton.
Norton. Okay. Yeah, yeah, definitely a popular one. Um, but which could have been easily overlooked, right? If it was Norton-ish in that email address, you might say, okay, yeah, this looks like it's coming from some sort of a customer service email address or a sales email address. So I would say, first warning sign that everyone needs to watch out for is certainly that email address, right? So just taking a look at it. In most cases, like I said, they'll try to recreate, be creative with a domain, but in order for them to do that, they have to do work. They have to, obtain a domain that looks similar. So they have to come up with it. They have to purchase it. They would have to implement it with email. So in a lot of cases, a lot of these emails come from, let's say, a Gmail address, right? So what they will do is they'll create Gmail accounts, just as an example. It could be Hotmail, it could be MSN, any of those kind of big providers of email, where they'll create an address maybe that's like McAfee support at gmail.com or something along those lines, right? So you look at it and go, okay, that looks legitimate on the front end of it, so it must be okay. However, in looking at that, that could have been the point where you might have, jumped off that train right away, right? You would have looked at it and said, wow, McAfee support at gmail.com. That looks a little bit suspicious. Maybe I'll go ahead and just stop for a second. I think with your situation, much like a lot of other situations like this, Jim, is the emotions that get involved, right? So you received that email and it actually stirs up, negative emotions, right? You get nervous, you get anxious. What is going on here? What, they just charged my card. How could that have been the case, right? So oftentimes people will kind of lead with that emotion, which is not good because it makes you jump to steps that you necessarily shouldn't be doing, right? So that would be the one thing I would say, definitely leading with emotion is not good. You almost have to act with email nowadays almost like a pilot or a surgeon or someone who is very strategic with things and just takes a level of patience and caution with every maneuver or every step that they're doing. So I would definitely say that, I think in your case, the emotion kind of got to you, right? And that's what kind of sparked things to set off. And that's really what they're looking for, right? So then at that point, you called into that number that was in the email.
How did they manipulate my checking account to show there was more money there than there really
Yeah.
was?
Yeah, it's pretty unique how they do it. There's a level of almost like web development involved that we can walk through just in layman's terms. But one other warning sign before we jump to that I would probably mention that you could have maybe picked up on, especially at least for now, artificial intelligence AI is really making this quite difficult. However, that email, in addition to checking the email address potentially just taking a moment to look through the content of the email would definitely be something I would recommend, right? So oftentimes the majority of these groups are, not necessarily always, but the majority are offshore. They are in locations where, their English might not be as good as, let's say, the United States. So there's warning signs in there from a grammar perspective, from a spelling perspective, and then the other one I would mention would be images, right? So you got that email. We probably could drum it up. We should have probably had it here to show folks. But one of the things that I probably would have suspected was in there was that whole bit about the Norton stuff, right? They don't want to retype all this stuff every time. They want to maybe have AI create this for them to make it look realistic, grammar wise, spelling wise, logos wise. So oftentimes it'll just be the email and then a big image in it. So wherever you click, it might take you out to, that scammer's website or something legitimate that they've created to look realistic. So just another warning sign there. I suspect, obviously, you don't know, exactly which steps happened with you, but, in most cases, what happens is that, you call that phone number and, the first thing that they're probably going to ask you to do is kind of verify, right, where you're calling. So they will pick up and depending on what phone number you call, they'll say that it's McAfee support. And again, we're just using McAfee as an example, but it could be Norton or any of these vendors could be a vendor that's not well known. But you call that phone number and it appears to be a legitimate source. It's, hey, welcome to Norton support. How may I help you? Another warning sign I would say, and again, this is obviously not true in all cases, but things to kind of keep in the back of your noggin would be accents. So, a lot of support is offshored, so that, would seem normal. But there's a level of support and professionalism, I would say, with, a lot of the support groups where, you're at least going to get a call tree to when you call a phone number to professionally walk you through something and not just somebody that's going to be like, hey, this is, how often do you really get to support within one phone call, right? One ring. So that should be another thing to be aware of there. But then the other thing would be, let's say, a call center kind of vibe, right? Can you hear all sorts of people talking in the background with, and maybe even speaking in a different language versus English? Again, not necessarily the case for all of these scams, but just things like warning signs to pick up on to be like, huh, that's interesting that, those types of things are going on when I feel like I should be talking to something that's more professional or someone that's more professional in their system. So, kind of leading to your question in regards to, how did they change your bank account? When the emotions are involved and you call this phone number, they're going to walk you through a script, right? So there is someone literally, sitting in that location and they have a script they're going to walk you right through in order to take advantage of your situation. I would suspect that at that point, that's when they had you load software onto your computer, right? So the easiest thing or the excuse is going to be, okay, this mistake has been made. We accidentally, went to refund you $400, but we refunded you $4,000. So now you owe us $3,600 or whatever that amount is, right? And the easiest thing to correct that is for me to connect to your computer, right? Which I think is what happened in your case. You had your laptop, you're on the phone with this individual, and they say, "Well, let me go ahead and check your bank," right? So what do? You log into your bank's portal on your web browser on your computer that you normally use. So all is legitimate there, and the bank kind of no one knows the wiser. Where, we watch for things like, where do your logins come from? What country? What IP address, which is basically an identifier on the network and on the internet that you're using. However, all of that seems legit at first, but then that moment that that person has you load something like a program called AnyDesk, and this can happen on mobile too, because unfortunately these remote tools can run on iPhone and Android. But a lot of times they'll have like TeamViewer or AnyDesk, or they bounce around. So as these tools kind of get more secure, and they're watched on, more heavily, they'll shift to another tool. But the idea would be what most of us are used to, right? At our work, when we need IT support, we call into a help desk and they say, "Let me just jump in your computer and I'll go ahead and fix it for you. Take over the mouse and run the screen and everything and fix your issue." But in this case here, that's from a personal perspective, from a person that shouldn't have any access to your computer. But again, emotion, leading with emotion, brought you down the path of, okay, well, that must be okay. I'm worried about this $4,000 that, they accidentally gave me that I need to give back to them. So I believe, I think it was AnyDesk in your case, right, that got loaded on your computer. And at that moment, when they connect from wherever they were, they at that point have full control over your computer, right? So something's been installed on your computer. It's a remote tool. They have access to transfer files. They can see your screen. They can pretty much do anything they want to. And what happened in your case is that when they gained access to your bank account, in that screen that you had running on your laptop, they were able to, in most cases, they'll lock the screen. So they'll create a fake image, and we all know, hey, the old Microsoft kind of blue screen where it says updating, performing updates, please wait. And you're on 2%, and sometimes it feels like you're on 2% forever, right? They will literally create fake images or fake videos to lock your screen, throw that up in front of you, and while you're looking at that, they're behind the scenes controlling your Windows operating system on your computer. They bring up the web browser where you've opened up your bank account, and they use, not to get too technical, but a thing called inspect element, which basically lets them see the HTML or the web code behind your bank account and literally create a fake transaction. So they are in your live portal, and they will actually then edit the code on the fly and doctor it to create that invalid transaction, or that transaction that really never happened, so they can prove to you that they've sent you money that you now owe them back, right? One other warning sign or one tip would be, hopefully you never find yourself again in this scenario or any of the folks that listen to this. But if you do, the one of the immediate things to think about there would be, okay, well, that's awfully strange. I don't feel good about this scenario. Refresh the web page, right? Because in most cases, the doctored code when you refresh that web page, it should go away. So that would be one thing where, a scammer would, if you went up to that refresh button as soon as that screen unlocked, they would probably try to convince you not to do that. But if you did, that transaction that they've created that's fake would actually disappear.
So the answer is if I had gone up to the top of my screen, hit the refresh button, that's all I had to do, I would have saved myself $2,000.
You would have, because you would have been like, or I would think so. It would depend on probably the savviness of the individual that you are working with. If you watch some of these scammer payback videos on YouTube, great resource, not tied to them or endorsing or anything like that, but they're doing amazing things. If you watch some of those videos, you'll see where in that case, they're trying to control, you and your emotions. So if you had, let's say that you had done that, Jim, what I suspect would have happened is that individual you were working with, while they may have been pleasant when you first started working with them, they would shift to a very, very aggressive approach and potentially even yell at you or make you feel bad or
Got
something
some
along.
of that. I got some of that later on
Yeah.
when I didn't want to go to send the money the way they did. So I go to the Apple store. They think I'm a idiot, which I
Yeah.
was, but I had the emotions still running high in me because I wanted to get this money back.
Yep.
So how how often should a person go to give a gift card back to pay somebody back like that?
Absolutely never. Right. That's another warning sign right there. While again, you're leading with emotions, you're driving around town. In a lot of cases, these individuals will keep you on the phone, right? They don't want you
Yeah,
to
they did. That's right.
yeah, there's some of those videos you see on Scammer Payback, there'll be people that, a bank, they'll roll up to the bank, and the bank will then recognize what's going on. But you had mentioned, hey, I don't believe anybody, right? I don't even believe the police could roll up and say, sir, you're on the phone with a scammer. No, I'm not. Especially when it comes to
That's right. That's what I thought.
yeah, especially when it comes to money, emotions, and then, God forbid they throw in some sort of family or something along those lines, right? Like, oh, you're not home, so, we have your children or something now, right? There's so much information on the dark web. So, there's, that's a huge thing. But yeah, in short, never, right? You would never pay anybody in gift cards, especially to go buy gift cards at, let's say, an Apple store and literally scratch the codes off, which I don't know if you did, because a lot of times you can't use a gift card unless you scratch off the code for it to be
Can't
activated,
remember what
right?
I can't remember that.
You probably did, because what they're doing is they're
I have
then
blacked it out.
yeah, yeah, for sure. I don't blame you. So they're for sure, on the other side, they've got the Apple gift card activation screen open, right? Oh, please, a lot of times they'll give you a mobile number to text the pictures to. So, nowadays that's great. Everybody loves an iPhone now. You can take a picture of text and push down on it, copy paste. It makes it super easy. Also makes it easy for
I think I
them.
did some of that. Yeah.
Yeah, they probably gave you a mobile number. You sent them pictures of the card with the number and then scratched off the codes. It literally gives them, within 2 seconds, they have the ability to activate those cards. And immediately what they do is then, they'll buy something, right? So they'll buy something right away, straight away to be able to use that card and cancel the balance on it, right? So then at that point, who's responsible for it? In the old days, I've seen scenarios Apple will help. They'll refund, your money that you've paid. In some cases, I mean, they can't afford to. There's just the number of scams, and I mean, they need to make money too as well, right? They can't just be giving
I
money away.
think, yeah, I spoke to Wells Fargo. I spoke to Wells Fargo about it, and they said, Jim, in the past, we tried to make people whole. We can't do that anymore because it's so rampant.
Yeah, for sure.
Let me switch gears and ask you about a second situation about an email that comes and wanting you to open a document. What can you do to protect yourself if that should happen to you?
Yeah, yeah, for sure. Yeah, we can go through. We're going to go through some kind of general cybersecurity tips here in just a few minutes. I would say they are general advice, so take what I say with a grain of salt. Just, again, general advice. I'm not really endorsing any of these tips, for that matter. But, one other thing I guess I would mention just to kind of quickly follow back up on, kind of repairing your situation, right, was the fact that you had mentioned that you took your laptop to one of the big box stores, right? And you're kind of in that desperation mode. And I think what happened is you had done that before we even chatted, I think. Because I do remember you texting me saying, or, you had at least told me about the situation, but I believe it was like later in the evening and you and Kathy were doing something and it was, should somebody be controlling my screen? You know what I mean? And I was like, well, no, that's not a good thing, right? And that's where you had mentioned, okay, well, you had brought your computer to one of the big box stores and they had done something to it, and gave it back to you within a couple of hours and said, you're all set. Here you go. You're ready to go. I think probably what happened there is, this stuff is pretty elusive. It's, these guys are good. So, what we had found in your case, just, for people to know, was I believe it was that AnyDesk program that they had used on your computer, right? So going back to that initial phone call where you had actually, worked with that individual, they had things installed on your computer. In that case, that AnyDesk program that had been installed had never been uninstalled, right? So unfortunately, whoever had worked on your computer at the big box store, they were able, they basically had never uninstalled that program. And I think, when you had texted me and asked, should someone still be connected to my computer? The answer was, clearly no. And at that point, I think that's where I had found, within the logs, the IP address of the connectivity where they were still connected to your computer whenever it was on, right? Whenever it had internet access, they were connected. And at that point, could transfer anything off of your computer, any files, control your screen, what have you. So they were basically following back up to see what else maybe they could do, to your situation, your computer. Um, and that's where we had found that IP address that tracked back to India, I believe, in that case, which goes right along with, again, if you watch some of these, YouTube scammer payback episodes, a lot of that, again, not every, scam, but a lot of them come from locations like that. So, that was, again, one thing I would say cautionary is that if you ever find yourself in a situation like this, is it good to go to a big box store or a computer shop? Yeah, I mean, you never know who you're going to get, who you're going to work with, right? But one thing I would say is that if you have anybody in your life, which most people do, an IT group at your business, an IT family member or a friend, I would probably recommend contacting someone like that, as quickly as possible for them to kind of talk you down off the ledge, right? Especially if it's early on. Jim, this is not real. I know you're going to think it's real. It's basically a negotiation at that point. It's not real here. Let me tell you the reasons why it's not real, right? And let me try to show you that, which is hard because when, like you said, when emotions involved, you're going to basically, think everything is kosher, and you want to go along for that ride, at that point. So yeah, I would just kind of, follow up with that. And then lastly, banks, we see this every day. So, that and check fraud, probably two of the biggest things that we need to battle. And, with these scenarios, again, the banks are, have your best interest in mind. So, like you said, Wells Fargo, I believe, called you to kind of say, "Hey, Jim, stop. This is not real." And, and you even mentioned, mentioning to them, well, it is real, and this is what's happening, right? So trying to step out of there. They have your best interest in mind. They want to help you. When in doubt, again, going back, another warning sign is, always feel free if you got a local branch for your bank, just go there, right? They're going to try to keep you on the phone, the scammers, even maybe when you walk into a branch, but there's nothing. You got a phone number for this person. I can call you back. If let me, I need to do something, not necessarily I need to go check with my bank to see if you're a legitimate person, but I need to take another call. I need to step away for a minute, go into a bank branch and, speak with a trusted employee at the branch or a branch manager or someone that maybe if it's a local branch. hey, what this is going on, or how do you feel about this? Can you give me some advice, right? That would be the other thing for sure. So, with your scenario, and again, the worst thing or the last thing you want is that your phone and or your computer winds up with software that stays on there, and then you don't know, right? Because most people are not going to be aware. And if someone's trying to sneak in, they're probably going to sneak in when you least expect it, right? If you leave it on at night, they may pop in, right? Because you'd be sleeping on Eastern time when they're in a much different time zone. So I would say, definitely checking for any software, usually in Windows in control panel. Again, not to be technical, but you can, see what software has been installed by date. So, that's always a good thing. Just go in, sort by date, and see when things were installed. What's this AnyDesk thing? Eek, that looks like it was installed during my panic session here. I best go uninstall that at least, right? If not, start all over again.
That's really helpful. I know that in preparing for today, uh, and it's titled Cybersecurity Tips, a study in technology and it's legal and personal advice. I know you have prepared some charts or notes or something that you can share on the screen with folks.
Yeah.
Could we go to those and let you start? I know you start with passwords and email and a number of other topics and just sort of run through them in a couple, maybe a half hour or so. Can we do that?
Yeah, I think so. Yeah. Again, with it being a podcast, we'll go through them each, each one. Typically, if presenting, I probably wouldn't hit every bullet point and read every bullet point,
Right,
but I
right,
think there's
right.
some value in the fact that, not only this being a video, but also a podcast. So, just things to watch out for. But again, general advice, nothing that's set in stone. I'm not telling you to do anything in particular, but I think, these should hopefully be. I tried to blend, personal tips into business tips because often nowadays, especially with the amount of information that's on the dark web, things start to crisscross, right? You'll have scenarios where people will get scammed, and unfortunately, they're a target of a business at that point. However, the scammers have personal information on that individual that they know they're talking to, right? So then they start to cross that line of, okay, well, how do they know my birth date and my social security number? Well, that's certainly odd. That must be my bank, or it must be this vendor I work with, right? So you got to be really careful there. So yeah, these, I'll share my screen and we can take a look at these tips and really just walk through them. And again, it'll cover your question, kind of circling back to your question about that email that you got with the attachment. We'll talk about, we'll have a slide on email. We'll talk through that.
Let's do that. And so that everybody knows, I have already, before we came on today, shared my screen with you. So you have control over the screen right now.
Yeah. Yeah, let me
So
go ahead
let's
and
let's
share.
go.
So let's get this going here and I'll flip it and yeah, we'll turn it on. It may take us a second just to get things going in the right direction here, but I think that probably should do it, right? You can see that okay, Jim?
Yes, I can.
Okay, awesome. So, yeah. So, like I said, these again, take these with a grain of salt. They are probably ones that hopefully you are all aware of when it comes to personal and business. But if not, maybe you pick up a few things along the way, right? So,
As,
again, being
as
a
yeah,
podcast,
as we
yeah,
go through, as we go through, keep in mind some of the people who will be listening to this will not be able to see the screen. So many will, but some won't.
yeah.
And so if you could just maybe, if you are on a tip, repeat what that tip might be.
Yeah, for sure. Like I said, we can read through them. It'll take a little bit. We've got quite a few. But yeah, I think it'll still have some value for sure. So, when it comes to, we'll start with passwords, right? So we've got a slide kind of some tips here with passwords if you want to kind of envision that in your noggin. But first point is, as painful as it may feel to do so, always use unique and strong complex passwords for every application that you have. So, the key thing here is we all know everybody loves to use the same password for your applications, right? And that was probably more so, 10, 15 years ago, it was the norm. You would create one password, you'd use it for your personal banking, for your work email, your access to, sensitive information applications that you had at work. But thankfully it's a lot harder to do that now. Like as a bank ourselves, we have really strict requirements on what people can and cannot use for passwords. So we tend to push people away from doing that, which is a good thing. And I would definitely recommend, if your IT group is not doing that, we'll cover that here in another bullet point. But again, it's hard to remember passwords, but the nice part is, we're going to talk about password managers here in a minute. You almost don't have to. And eventually passwords in theory will go away. So, that's something to look forward to there as well. Again, just general tip, always make it a habit to change your passwords on a regular basis. People, tend to, I don't know, Jim, how many passwords you have that you have not changed on a regular basis, but it's probably, or maybe so after your scenario, but I don't know how often you change passwords, but what would you say? Like once a year, maybe if you're lucky?
Yes, and I should change it more often. I know some banks change them every month.
Sure. Yeah, for
For
sure. Yep. And if in some cases, some vendors will kind of leave that up to you, right? So they're kind of saying, okay, well, if you want to take that chance, then you've signed some fine print somewhere along the way that says that they're not ultimately responsible if that information should be leaked by a third party or something like that, right? Or if you happen to give it away or use, worst case, use the same password for your Apple account as you do for your bank, which leads to the next bullet point, which is you know I would say for anyone that's listening now, if you have not already, there was a relatively huge breach of credentials that happened or that was discovered recently on the dark web. It's roughly 16 billion sets, I believe, is the last article I read, and unfortunately the vendors that are included in there are Apple, Google, Microsoft, Netflix, pretty much any well-known platform that you can think of. There are credentials in there. And at 16 billion, there's a really good chance that every single one of us that's, participating in this podcast and video, their credentials are probably out there. So I would say, definitely right straight away. I'll give you an example of this. My wife is one of those individuals who likes to use or used to use, I'll say, one password for pretty much everything. And we've had this conversation many a times in regards to changing her passwords. And shortly after this particular article came out, she had texted me one day, "Hey, someone's trying to log into my Apple account." And sure enough, it was more than likely a result of this data that was out there. So now she knows better. She's been through it. And thankfully, she had multi-factor authentication, which will, again, technical term, but we'll talk about that here in a minute again. But thankfully we were able to block that request from coming through and get her passwords changed. So I would say definitely change your passwords across the board and don't use the same one. Use so this next bullet point here, which is use a password manager, right? So
it's a
password
good,
managers, yeah, go ahead,
what's
Jim.
a, yeah, what's a good time frame to change your password? How often should you change it?
Most business applications, I would think for sensitive information, we tend to, or businesses will tend to use like a 90 days thing. That might be a little aggressive when it comes to a personal password, but, to make you have to remember that. As far as changing, granted, you're probably going to store it in a password manager. So at that point, it's really just, house cleaning. How often are you going to think to change your passwords if everything's working for you, right? Especially when you've got Face ID and all these things set up. Um, I would say probably at least once every 6 months, maybe just kind of blow through your password manager that you do select and kind of go, you know what? Let me go ahead and change my passwords for my most aggressive accounts, my personal finance, my wealth management application, things that would hit you in the pocketbook or potentially maybe even your healthcare, right? So healthcare portals, patient portals, things that I built in had in my past life, electronic health record ties and things like that. So So I would say probably once, every 6 months is probably a good practice. I try to do it with the seasons, like as the season changes. So that's always a good one too, depending on where you live, I suppose. But a couple of examples of password managers. The passwords app that is now built into iOS, if you have an iPhone, is really great. Not only will it let you store your passwords for apps and for websites and stuff, but it'll give you passwords to use, right? So that's where you're on an app now or a website, and it basically says, "Hey, suggest new password," and you may look at it and go, that is a bunch of gobbledygook that I'm never going to remember. That's kind of the point, right? So the longer it is, the better, right? The longer, the more complex it is, the better. And with a password manager, as long as let's say you're using your MacBook and you kind of stay maybe Apple-ish or Google-ish or Microsoft-ish, your passwords can kind of follow you around on your devices now at this point. When it comes to business use, there are some great platforms out there that, you would think, well, why the heck would I put my passwords to my business app into my business in the cloud, right? That makes no sense because why wouldn't I just keep them close to home on a Word document or an Excel document, that kind of thing, or in some local file. With that, things like 1Password are great examples of that. So, from a business perspective, having your credentials stored, even 1Password, just as an example, again, no endorsements here, but great web-based platform for a password manager. But in that case, they don't even know the passwords, right? The encryption levels that they're using in their databases and such are storing that data that it's almost like a shell game. That data is kind of floating all around and they really don't have access to it. So really only you do. So great points there. When it comes to, minimum password requirements, and this is probably more of a business tip. So, folks that are listening to this that have, even small attorneys firms, right? Small firms or large firms alike, making minimum password requirements for end users and implementing what's called password protection are great steps, right? Not too hard to implement when it comes to, let's say, if you're connected to like Microsoft Azure, or now it's called Entra, basically the cloud. So if you're logging into 365 for Office, for Word and Outlook, that would be the Azure backend or Entra backend. Implementing password protection along with, hey, how many characters should we put for an account for an end user? How many characters should be the minimum that they need to have in order to make it, things less guessable, right? So just a couple of follow-up, sub bullet points for this one is, when it comes to password protection, there's some great things you can do that, are just high level, but not allowing your company name in the password, not allowing your product names that you have or your services names, not allowing the names of seasons or years, the current year, and maybe years, 5, 10 years on either side. Not allowing your username in the password or your name itself. Those are great things to implement with a password protection solution that maybe by default you might not have on, right? So now it kind of increases that attack surface when it comes to things like brute force attacks. And just to follow up on that, just as an example, this may or may not be super accurate because it changes by the day, but typically an 8-character password, if you have one, takes roughly minutes to hours to brute force attack it. So, everything that these supercomputers can do now, AI and everything that's coming along the lines, makes it super easy for this to happen, to be cracked. But in retrospect, or in comparison, a 16-character password takes roughly about 1 billion years to crack. So, for 8 more characters, is it worth it to force your individuals in your firm to have a 16-character password? Absolutely right. And at the same time, make it complex with a character and a number and uppercase letters, lowercase letters, things of that nature. Next would be, just again, all advice, general advice, but when it comes to your administrator level accounts, right? You're going to have IT admins within your organization. You may have an operations person that has some administrative access to not only your domain where all your users and passwords live, but also your most critical applications. Make those password requirements even stronger, right? Take a 16-character password and turn it into a 32-character password, right? So, really all that does is just makes it a lot harder for your IT team to work with things. But in the grand scheme of things, it makes it that much harder to guess a password. And then I'd say, in addition to when it comes to admins, even having timeout periods for those individuals, right? Whereas, a regular Mary Swanson end user might be able to be in Office 365 all day and never have to log back in, but an admin may have to log back in every 3 hours in order to refresh their credentials. So that way, if they've left their laptop somewhere or someone's hijacked their session, then those credentials that are stored go away. So that's a little bit on passwords, Jim. I don't know if you have any questions there before we hop into email.
I think that's pretty comprehensive. So we're
Okay.
next to emails.
Yeah, onto email. So some tips here when it comes to, the example that you shared earlier, which was, basically what's called a business email compromise. So the tip here is to basically keep in mind how serious that is, right? I think in a lot of cases, what I've seen, just by personal experience, is that when what's called a BEC, when that comes into play, oftentimes you can interact with the organization that's experienced a business email compromise, and you may just be working directly with that individual who's had that their email compromise. In most cases, they have hopefully already contacted their IT or IS department, but in some cases, just changing your password's not necessarily the only thing that's going to come into play there, right? Most people would think, oh, okay, a bad actor has been in my email. Let me go ahead and change my password and I'm okay, right? Some bullet points here, some sub bullet points to keep in mind is that with a BEC, that mailbox has actually been compromised, right? So when it comes to the email in that mailbox, it typically means that all the email in that mailbox has been accessed. And I think, Jim, I think at one point too, someone might have been in your email, I think too, right? At a certain
Yeah.
point.
Yeah. Yes. Yes.
Yeah. So I think you ultimately experienced this too at a certain point. I think in a different situation, maybe a year or two ago, that I think I helped you out.
Yes.
Um,
Yes.
but definitely good to keep that in mind that, oh, wait a second, wow, they had access to all the email that's in there. It's hard to think about that, right? As opposed to, oh, somebody was just in there for a second, kind of scenario. And along those same lines, right, depending on what kind of business you're in, I think, we've got finance represented here, we've got legal represented in what we're talking about here. There's levels of sensitive information in those emails. So we need to keep in mind that, okay, when a BEC occurs, what are really the responsibilities here, right? When it comes to the individual, the IT group, the executives and such, or the members of the business to go, wow, do we need cyber insurance involved with what just happened here? Do we need law enforcement? Do we need legal resources, maybe from another firm? In addition to, do we need to do any sort of breach notifications, right? So just things to keep in mind there that, on top of just changing a password, right? And, hopefully from an IS and IT perspective, one of the things would be, depending on what platforms you're on, is to get that bad actor out of there as quickly as possible, right? So not only changing a password, but then finding a way to clear to log out of all active sessions so that if someone is from a bad actor is in that email, they get kicked out, that password has been changed. Now they would need to refish that person over to cause another compromise, right? Or to get back to where they were. This next point here is really technical, technical gobbledygook. Really, all I'm going to say is, in emails for scams and for spamming, there's things called spoofing, which basically, if you have a domain and it's, at jimseminar.com, and with that, someone then is able to spoof your email. They could ultimately send emails as, bad actor at jimsseminars.com, right? Which you don't want them to do. So in short here, not going to really get into this one too much, but just some three things to keep in mind if you wanted to share them, let's say with an IT group or what have you. DKIM, DKIM, DMARC, DMARC, and SPF, which is they're all what's called records in your domain naming system or DNS. And In short, layman's terms, just good things to have turned on, right? You want to have them turned on to prevent your domain from being used for spam, but then also to prevent people from compromising your email and to make sure that you're kind of a trusted sender when it comes to email on that one there. Next one, if a BEC does occur, there are a couple of things that I just wanted to point out here that you really want to check on. So again, in thinking, okay, well, I've just changed my password, so I should be okay. In a lot of cases, you may not be. So there are things called rules. Everybody knows what rules are, right? We all know and love them within our Outlook. If you use Outlook or Gmail or G Suite, you can create an email that or a rule that says, hey, let me take any incoming emails from Jim and throw them into the Jim folder and mark them as read, right? Works great. Great for especially when we get into more AI agents and assistants and things like that. However, in a business email compromise scenario, a lot of times what will happen is that the bad actors will create rules that are malicious, right? So they will create a rule pretty much right away that will forward all of your incoming emails to an external mailbox that they've set up, right? So now your sensitive emails are immediately being forwarded to an external source. The other thing that they will do to kind of prevent, which I think in your case, Jim, you had an example where you emailed back the person to ask, hey, is your email okay, or is this legitimate? And the bad actor replied and said, sure is. Yep, go ahead and open that attachment, right? A lot of times what will happen is the bad actor will create rules to drop all incoming messages into a subfolder such that if you were to email them right away and go, hey, this email looks suspicious, are you sure you're okay, or what have you, they would not see that email on their phone or their computer because it's been tucked down into a subfolder to kind of prevent you from alerting the victim that's part of the BEC at that point. So, but I think, you had mentioned that, Jim, where, you had actually emailed back and in reality, you were probably interfacing with the bad actor.
Yeah, fortunately, in that situation, I did not open the document. I called the
Mhm.
number. Uh, it went to the restaurant, the Village Tavern, and then I got the real number and learned that his email had been hacked. So I was
Exactly.
spared.
Yeah.
But I could have easily opened that, accepting that he had sent it to me.
Yeah, and it could be depending on what you have for protection in that regard, right? A lot of times what that's geared to do is repeat, rinse and repeat, right? So they want to phish an individual, create a business email compromise, and immediately, unfortunately, in programs, email programs, it's super easy to almost immediately create a rule or whatever or code that they do to basically scrape every email that you have in your mailbox and pull every single email address out, regardless of whether it was a direct communication. It'll grab stuff from the CC as well. So even if you weren't directly involved with that particular person, you may have been CC'd 2 years ago on an email. It's going to rinse and repeat the whole process and basically spider web that same phishing email out to cast that net further. And in most cases, the attachment that's on the email will prompt you for things like Microsoft 365 credentials, right? So they want to then gain your credentials in order to then attempt to get into your mailbox. In worst cases, well, that is really bad. But in even further cases, they may have malicious code, a virus or a Trojan or a worm or something along all those terms that you've heard for that are bad, right? When some or ransomware for what have you. So definitely something you want to be careful of, which leads us to our next point, which is by default with email, if you don't have an email security platform in place, again, no particular endorsement, but things like Proofpoint are great solutions. If you don't have one of those in place, you need one. You got to be able to look at all your incoming emails that are going through your system to figure out what's good and what's bad, right? Be able to create safe sender lists and block sender lists, and in addition, attachments, right? So if you're not working with who doesn't work with PDFs, right? So one particular one that, pretty much everybody has to go through, and scammers know that. So they'll use those as, oh, let me open this PDF. Oh, let me click the link in the PDF, and then it asks you for your credentials. But in regards to, macros, if you're not using macros for complex spreadsheets or, a particular, I don't know, a particular extension of a file, right? We're all familiar with in file, there's .txt for a text file, or, hey, where do you have your .pptx, which is your PowerPoint file, right, to send me? For things, it's best to kind of take the zero trust approach and block as many attachments incoming as possible because they're just going to get quarantined anyway. They can always be released if they were legitimate, and then add exceptions, right, to those rules. Oh, well, Jim sends me a lot of spreadsheets with these complex, formulas in them for finance purposes, and they have macros. So we don't want to catch them. We want them to go to our CFO. So let's go ahead and make an exception and basically whitelist that domain, if that makes sense. So,
Yeah.
that can certainly help. That, depending on what that attachment was, I think it was probably a PDF that you got, Jim. So that's a kind of a bad example. But let's say it were some, obscure file attachment. It could have been blocked on the way in, and you would have never received it. Granted, you would have never known that that person you knew got compromised, but somebody else would have called them, right? And that was a good point that you made, which was, never trust what's in the email signature. The bad actor is going to, whether they've duplicated a domain to look similar or they've truly compromised the mailbox, they're going to, doctor the signature to have you almost rinse and repeat your scenario with the $2,000 scenario of, oh, let me put in a phone number in there that goes to, you know, such and such business support line. So you're calling what you think is the legitimate business, but in reality, you're calling another scammer, maybe in the same data or the same call center that you worked with before.
Let me before
Yeah,
we go from we reminds me of that Smokey and the Bandit
the
television movie,
movie,
a movie a long time ago when the song
yeah,
was
Art
a
Reynolds.
long way to go and a short time to get there. So we're about 10 or 15 minutes away from the hour that we allotted for this.
Yeah.
Should we skip through to some of the more high points, or should we just keep on and do a second uh, session
Yeah,
later?
I say let's just keep going. I'll speed up a little bit and we can I'm pretty sure we can get through them all.
Okay, go
Yeah,
for
for sure. Next bullet point on email would be, internal mail flow rules, right? So we just talked about rules within your Outlook or your email client. More than likely you have rules in place now that basically highlight messages from external senders, right? So it gives you a little warning across the top when you get an external email, typically in more of a business environment. Definitely something to have if you don't. And then the other point there would be employee impersonation, right? So having an email come from, CEO Mary Swanson, but it's coming from a Gmail address, right? So it's not coming from Mary's true business address, but coming from a Gmail account. You want to be able to highlight that, right? So putting a rule in place to change the subject and put like a really, a big warning flag in front of it. Hey, double check this because this is probably not the Mary Swanson that you're trying to communicate with.
right.
And then lastly, for email, anytime you're using sensitive information, always use encryption. All right, anything that's PII related or HIPAA related, any sort of confidential information, have an email encryption solution in place for outgoing messages. And what that will do is keep that information outside the email by basically almost like your patient portal when you go to check your lab results. Same scenario, right? They're not going to drop your lab results into an email in plain text. They're going to send you a link to log into that secure portal in order to view that message. So same thing there too as well.
Gotcha.
Cruising on through, speeding up. Oh, you got something, Jim?
No, no, you go
Oh,
right
you're
ahead.
good. When it comes to the next topic would be professional networking and then personal social websites. So we'll touch on a few things real quick here. Definitely being mindful of the information that you list on publicly accessible professional networking websites, right? So the one that comes to mind is LinkedIn, right? There's others. There's all sorts of websites that we all use from a business perspective, maybe, legal related professional websites, let's say. One thing that we find, or that I've, again, just personal experience, is that bad actors, they're going to troll websites like LinkedIn, right? They're going to look for hey, who's new at this firm or who just got promoted to a partner at this firm? Well, that's interesting. They look like a high value target to me, so I'm going to target them. Um, they may also use that contact information for what's called smishing and then spear phishing campaigns. So smishing is really the text, right? You're going to get the text, and this falls back to your scenario, Jim, which is, hey, this is Mary Swanson, the CEO of your firm. You're a new employee. Bring that emotion level up. I need you to go buy me 7 Apple gift cards, right? And scratch them off and take a picture and send them to my other number because I don't have my personal cell phone number with me right now. So time sensitive favors, right? Emotions, time sensitive favors. When it comes to personal websites, again, just bringing to mind Facebook and Instagram. We all love and know and love those fun apps that are in there, right? Hey, take a picture of yourself, upload it, and turn yourself into a cartoon or something along those lines, right? More than likely, without you knowing, those are gaining access to all of your personal info and potentially even your images, your videos, and things that you have in your social accounts. So just something to be aware of there. The other thing that happens, which I don't know why it still occurs, I think it's, I'm again, personal opinion, but I would say it's probably to gain more users for these platforms. But, why are we getting, friend requests from people that we're already friends with, right? Somebody's account is not set for public screening. Or it's set for public screening and all of their information is publicly available, including their picture, name, about information on Facebook, let's say, those settings haven't been changed, and therefore that data is available to bad actors. They'll basically create another Jim Blackburn, and then you get a friend request, right? Why it's not smart enough to know that you're already friends with the legitimate Jim is beyond me. But again, never clicking that because as soon as you click it, you've then given that particular person access to your information, and it's rinse and repeat from there. Locking down, kind of going along those same lines, locking down all your personal social media websites to restrict your information to only family and friends. It is kind of crazy, but if you dive into like the security and settings area, I think it is of Facebook, a lot of times you'll see that all your posts and your profile and everything are set for public, which is no good. So changing that to just family, I think it's friends is the value that you can do, is kind of keeps things in that level. You can even do that on LinkedIn too, as well, depending on how you want to, kind of secure yourself in that regard, but not stifle how you do business. Security awareness training and testing is our next topic. As a business, you definitely want to perform this monthly. End users need constant security training. I won't, endorse another product, but just another mention. Products like Ningio are great. They are, cartoon-based examples. They keep people engaged. They're based on real-time, current events of things that happen. They're very short. They have 1 or 2 questions at the end, and you're good. Keeps people, they have actors, John Lovitz, all these kind of older actors that need some work. They have people in there doing the voiceovers. They're really good. Next, performing real world monthly email phishing simulation testing, right? So this is a huge thing. A lot of IS and IT groups will do this monthly now too as well. Sending out those emails with emotions in them. You got an HR issue, or you got a bonus, or something went wrong. Those are things that people are going to use those same emotions that you had, Jim, and click on the link, right? So using, email phishing simulation testing, but then taking it to the next level, which is reviewing the results, right? Kind of seeing how your users are faring, for, God forbid it's a real scenario, because 1 click is too many. But then also, using that data to fine tune your email protection system on the way in. So if you're doing a test that's based on HR, for an incident, you can then fine tune your rule to look for anything that might be coming in the real world from there that's going to be around that same subject and quarantine it right away. And if it, and then whitelist your HR system, your things that you use for HR, payroll, that kind of thing, and basically say, hey, if something does come from them, it's okay. Lastly, on this one, requiring employees to perform additional training from a business perspective is huge, right? You got to have some follow up. There's got to be some skin in the game when it comes to responsibility. And then even going to the point of risking disciplinary actions is something where, unfortunately, where we're at. Lastly, I guess, or next bullet point would be, sharing what you learn with family and friends when it comes to training. We are fortunate enough for that, like that Ninjio platform I mentioned, we're fortunate enough, I think we can add up to 7 family and friend members to that platform, which is great. So we, share it with our folks and people that, could use some additional training in life. Next slide or next set of topic is social engineering and physical security. So some things to be aware of there. You've probably heard the term deepfake, which is a technology where, unfortunately, at this point, both audio and video are being duplicated. So, you could potentially interact, let's say, in a Teams or a Zoom, like we're doing right now, with someone that's fake. So, someone that's, maybe the CFO of your company or a high value client or something along those lines. So again, that's one of those, if you're suspicious of something, walk across the hallway if you're in the same building and go to the CFO and go, hey, how come you're not on this Zoom that I'm on with you in another room, right? That's really the point there. Being aware of random personalized texts, I think these have increased dramatically recently, at least from what I've seen with family and friends and myself. Phone numbers you don't recognize, right? Hey, how's your dog doing? I just wanted to check in and see how how things are faring. How's the family, right? Very personal-ish type text messages from a phone number you don't know. Bottom line, just personal advice, probably, never delete and report those as junk. God forbid, you reply to it and then all of a sudden you get sucked into an emotional based conversation. Not having people, people that you don't have in your contacts. I think we all probably have everybody we know in our contacts at this point. So kind of putting some trust into that. Next, being mindful of QR codes. We all love those, right? COVID came along and it was, you got to go for, a bite at J. Alexander's and the menu is no longer, right? So here's a QR code to scan this. Unfortunately, a couple of examples here is that, I've read articles recently where bad actors will place these in public places. Let's say, someone's lost their dog, and it's again emotion based, right? Oh man, I really want to search and help for that dog. Scan the QR code and it downloads something to your phone or some takes you to some sort of malicious website. So being aware of those and just stopping and thinking for a second. Next example would be, bad actors actually replacing QR codes, right? You go to one of those restaurants post-COVID, and all of a sudden there's a sticker over the QR code that was there before. Did they update that? And is it authentic? Or did someone come in and start slapping stickers on the menu to cover up the codes to do something malicious? Next bullet point would be, keeping in mind that bad actors are not just virtual. This is crazy to think, and I don't think we do, but take picture your firm, and someone coming in and they've got the official outfit on, the golf shirt and the pants, like the khakis, the Peter Millar's, and oh, I'm Chuck, and I'm here from the IT team, and I'm here to do some work on your computer, right? Sounds harmless, but bad actors will do this now. They'll dive in the dumpster. They'll walk behind somebody and, ask them how their day is and shoulder surf them into a protected area. Things to keep in mind there. Along those same lines, always keeping visitors in a general area. Never let anybody into a secure area of your firm, or your bank or whatever your business. Just always keeping people in a general area. Bad actors will actually now even get to the point where they will have a laptop. They'll plug in if they can't get into a Wi-Fi system. They'll physically plug into a network jack that's behind a plant on the wall that you may have forgotten to turn off. Just kind of looking at your common areas and going, hey, there used to be a desk over here. Wow, if I plug in, I can get on our network. Sure do need to turn that off, right? Things of that nature. And then lastly, bullet point on this one, ensuring that both the guest and the corporate Wi-Fi networks that you have in your business are segmented, right? You don't want anybody that's on your guest network to have access to your corporate network, which is an obvious one, right? Most cases that's hopefully in place already. Next bullet point would be considering, implementing a modern security platform. We all have video cameras in some form or fashion in our businesses. In a lot of cases, they're from the Smokey and the Bandit timeframe, right? They're from the 80s. They're the little TV that has the tuner thing on it already, right? And you can't really see anything on those recorded videos. It makes perfect sense to upgrade to a cloud-based solution now, especially with AI. There are solutions now where you can, if you're looking for a person with a blue hat that has a logo and drives a Chevy Monte Carlo, you can plug that in and it'll search through all the video and give you the results in a matter of seconds, which is amazing and be in high definition. Next topic, we're cruising on through here. Identity theft and personal property. Some bullet points here. One thing that's interesting, you guys may or may not know about, but again, the majority of you on that are listening to this podcast or looking at this video are going to be probably high value targets, right? There it is possible if you haven't already on Google Maps where your residence is to put in a request to have it blurred, right? The last thing you want is bad actors getting you into an emotion-based situation, and then from there in the thick of it going, oh, check your text. And you get a text of a picture of your front yard with your house in it, where your wife and kids or husband may be home or your partner. And then just stepping things up to the next level. Wow, I'm involved in some sort of extortion scam here. So easily it takes a few days for them to approve it, but you can literally have it so that on Google Maps on streets, your house is blurred out. Along those same lines, which you guys are probably familiar with the dentist in North Raleigh, Dr. Adams, that recently had that horrible situation here in Raleigh where his house, the deed to his house was taken by someone. And it happened due to an error, I believe, with like let's say a Zillow or something like that, one of those things where unfortunately there was a short period of time where his house was listed incorrectly, and a bad actor went to the registry of deeds, I believe, in Raleigh and literally filed for a deed claim and took over his entire home. So he had to fight tooth and nail with that through civil court and criminal court to be able to get through that process. But it is possible to put alerts on your home's deed and title. I would do it right away. Unfortunately, it wouldn't prevent it from happening. However, if someone did make a change to it, you would get an alert to then be, kind of in a good spot to take advantage of some steps for that. Subscribing yourself and your family to an identity theft protection program. There's Aura, there's LifeLock, not endorsing any, of course, same consistent theme here. And then enable really, real-time alerts. I'll give you just a super quick example on that. I had a scenario with that a couple of weeks ago where someone, probably that data that's from that large breach, someone had tried to open an account with Chase in my name where LifeLock sent me a text as I was working here at the office. And thankfully, I was able to just reply to Norton through the app by going into the app and working with it. And within, I think, 20 minutes, they had contacted Chase, canceled that request. My account was frozen and deleted, and none the wiser. They never got access to that account. So definitely worth the money. There's family plans for a lot of those to get even your children on there, right? Next would be, we're all used to using what's called a VPN at work. You can't do anything without a VPN these days, it seems like, but taking that one step further and adding it to your personal laptop and mobile devices is a great thing, right? We all connect to Starbucks Wi-Fi. We go on trips, we connect to hotel Wi-Fi. So, in that regard, I would say, using a VPN or adding it as a service to Aura or LifeLock, they typically have those, is a great thing. Freezing your credit at all the three major credit bureaus. Again, having a solution in place for identity theft is awesome, but also locking or freezing your credit with all the three credit unions or credit bureaus is awesome, because even if something did try to go through, it would not, because whatever vendor, let's say it's T-Mobile or Chase or what have you, they wouldn't be able to check your credit. So thankfully, the bad actor would probably be held up in opening an account for you. Super easy to do. It's free. You can do it on each website. And some of those services like Aura and LifeLock can actually do it for you. From a budgeting perspective, again, kind of steering more towards business, but outlining the best tech stack, if you want to call it that, for your firm. I would say inquire with similarly sized organizations in your area. What always helps to figure out what everybody else is doing, right? What platforms do you have in place, and what kind of budget do you have for IS and IT? Because we may need to, revisit it and put something more in place in order to be able to have things that can protect us. Again, along those same lines, being sure to weigh the possible consequences, right? If you're going to kind of go into things from an IS and IT perspective of saving money, that's great. However, the consequences might cost you a lot more money than it would to have things in place. With that same approach, IS and IT resources from a business perspective, it's really important at this stage in the game to keep in mind that everybody knows the buzz term information security, IS, information technology, IT. A lot of us tend to think that it's the same thing, but as businesses grow, you want to basically separate those, right? You don't want to have a conflict of interest in place where, God forbid, someone that's running both departments could potentially cover up for an employee or something along something along those lines. Lastly, on this slide, documentation. So, most businesses are not big enough, let's say, to have a business continuity plan or an incident response plan, but should you have one? Absolutely. It just makes sense, right? So, in addition to creating those where you're basically saying, all right, well, what are all these apps we have? What are all these vendors we use? What do we do if a phishing incident does occur and we have a business email compromise? Where are the steps that we're supposed to follow? Having that stuff in place, but then also testing it, right? You can create the best documents and then never use them. But if you don't do tabletop exercises, then if they're, they don't remain up to date, right? And they don't test out. So testing a fake phishing incident is a great way to test that out. Vendor management, a couple of points here. Again, we all have plenty of relationships with third parties. That was probably, the biggest thing over the past 20 years was you had a third party or two or three or four. But now you've got fourth party plus relationships. So it's really important to keep in mind that, you're working with a vendor, but they may work with Microsoft, and Microsoft is working with this vendor and that vendor, or what have you. So it's really important to keep track of those fourth party relationships and to track all of all those vendors somewhere, in a vendor management tracking system and track them by significance and risk, right? You want to know which ones have your most sensitive data and how risky those companies are and how are they doing? Are they financially healthy? Are they about to go bankrupt? What would happen to our data if that happened? Where are they backing that stuff up if I'm using a cloud app? A couple of real quick points. Artificial intelligence. One thing here would be, everybody wants to use it. You got to walk into it slowly, personal opinion, but determining that pace at which you want to introduce that into your organization, right? Choosing the people that you may want to use artificial intelligence, whether it's ChatGPT or Microsoft Copilot for 365, those particular solutions. And then, also putting guardrails in place, right? We want to use these things. They're amazing. It responds to stuff in 2 seconds and gives you an entire reference letter or an analysis of some financial data or maybe a court case or something like that. But, where does that data go if you share protected information, right? So just making sure that you understand that, and then also having a policy in place around the use of AI, updating, existing acceptable use policies, for example. One last thing here on the AI front, which we've probably all seen, especially being in legal finance, are these AI-based note takers, right? Everybody loves to get the email after the Teams call that breaks down everything we just talked about. But what in the world? What if it had sensitive information in it, right? What if there was confidential trade secrets or something along those lines in that call? Where did that data go, right? Who invited me to that Teams meeting? What solution do they use, right? Potentially even looking at blocking that stuff if you want to be a little bit more safe. Coming down to the last two slides here, so we'll cruise on through and hopefully that'll put us in relatively good shape. We're going to just quickly chat about attack surfaces, security, and then just technologies in general. So, and again, these are a blend of personal and business items here, Jim. So, you know, everybody knows multi-factor authentication, MFA, right? That's when, you get a text message when you go to log into a bank website or your business application that you're using, or you get a little push message from the app that you have. Enabling that on all your personal sites. Most people don't think about it, but look at your top 25 sites that you have where your personal information is and see if they have it. People forget to do it on Facebook, and then all of a sudden their whole entire profile is compromised. We have another neighbor who this happened that we'll see here shortly, and she had that scenario. Never got her Facebook back. All the images, all the posts gone with no help from Facebook because there are no people at Facebook to contact. So just keeping that in mind. Limiting access to your resources at your business to foreign countries. Again, not that bad things aren't happening here in the States, but again, reducing your attack surface, right? If you have a particular environment or your office environment, does someone ever need to connect to your VPN from a foreign country outside of the US? Maybe not. If so, block it, right? There's things called conditional access policies that are used for that. Following those same lines, being on network to use anything, right? The last thing you want to do is provide your 365 credentials in one of those phishing emails inside a PDF or a link, which then the bad actor has those credentials to then turn right around and be able to try to log in as you. You want to take not only the country out of play, but you also want to take the fact of not being on network, right? Things like Microsoft 365, you don't want to make them accessible just from the browser that you can get to from a hotel. You want to be on network, so you've got to be connected to your VPN, let's say, in order to even use those resources. Along those same lines, something that's becoming more popular now is phishing resistant proximity verification. Big long term there for multi-factor. In short, basically what that means, gang, is that if you're using multi-factor authentication, we'll get to a point where you may need a device that's close to the device you're trying to connect from, and using Bluetooth technology, they talk to each other to go, oh, okay, Jim is trying to connect and he's connecting from, he's getting this MFA request on his mobile phone that happens to be sitting next to his laptop. So unless your laptop and your computer have been compromised and taken, and they know the passwords to both, there's a really good chance that someone hasn't been able to get in through a phishing attempt. Being aware of MFA fatigue, which you may have heard that term before, that in short is just really where you get 1,000 multi-factor authentication requests and go, it must be me. So tap approve, and all of a sudden, someone's off to the races. Just preventing that or being aware of that. If you didn't make a request, stop, right? Call somebody, have them check on what's going on there. From a business perspective, there's a process called hardening. It's something that, it's very easy to miss, but in short, taking all of your client server applications you have on site, all the applications you have in the cloud, along with all your workstations and servers that are all in this network that you have at the office, and performing hardening, which basically means that don't just have every feature available on them. Don't have every security option open. Button them right down to, to the point where you can use them, but they're protected from people doing bad things, right? Or snooping around. Minimizing attack surfaces by doing zero trust in least privileges models. Basically, what that means is out of the gate, don't trust anything. Zero trust for access to applications. And then in addition, providing people with the least amount of privileges to use an application in order to prevent something really bad from happening. Consider performing third-party internal and external penetration assessments, right? Things that we don't think about. So as a firm, it's in your best interest to hire a third party to do, maybe twice a year, have them try to break into your network, right? Do that in conjunction with your IS and your IT partner or internal resources to just get an idea of, wow, I didn't realize we were open there. We need to close that up. Another big, popular topic, especially like in the world of finance, when we're talking about, check images of people's checks that may have, been taken somehow from a third party or what have you is a good example, or documents, or just people's, from people's computers. Monitoring the dark web is a great thing that we all need to kind of look towards, and there's solutions out there for that to, kind of get a feel. You would want to know that if there were legal documents out on the dark web that are tied to your firm, you would want to know about it. But then how the heck do you know? Because you don't go to the dark web, right? You want to use a solution to monitor that. Enabling all available monitoring and alerting features, again, more techie business things, but just making sure that if you've invested in these platforms from an IS and IT perspective, turn on the alerting, right? Find out when somebody's trying to get into your environment that really shouldn't be there. Next bullet point is performing regular data restorations. Just make sure that you can restore. Again, going back to that business continuity plan, you want to make sure that you can recover. You don't want your business to get completely shut down. And then the next step with that is a thing called immutable ransomware proof backups. So basically, those are backups where the bad actors at one point in time figured out how to corrupt your backups too as well. And basically would lock you completely out. So that's the scenarios like you'll see with big healthcare organizations, unfortunately, right? Big hospitals, they're down for weeks. Their health records are not available because the backups are corrupted as well. Immutable backups are a great solution that basically are ransomware proof and can be used for restoration purposes. Reviewing your sensitive data on a regular basis, right? Just, what do we have? What's the age of it? Who has access to it? Should they have access to it? That's another thing, that you want to know. So just, regularly reviewing that from a business perspective. And then last slide to kind of come into the home stretch here, Jim. Just some more topics around these kind of general tips. But you know, when it comes to business email compromise and phishing emails in general, time is of the essence, right? So if you happen to get one and it's suspicious to you, report it to your IS and IT group right away. That helps us for, people in our positions to like really quickly turn around. First thing we're going to do is go, wow, where else did it go, right? Who else got it? Hit those people up on Teams, call them real super quick. Hey, don't open that email. We're working on it. A customer got compromised, that kind of thing. So that's really important. And in Jim's, example where he replied and the bad actor said, yeah, sure, go ahead and open that attachment. I am who you think I am. I'm your buddy, here at this law firm. It's okay to open that attachment about the financial statement. Don't reply, right? Just go, okay, yeah, if this looks weird, chances are somebody bad is in that email. So find their contact information, not from their signature, which we learned from Jim's example, but contact that person via their mobile number, or go see them in person. Great time to visit a friend. Restricting access to sensitive information on personal mobile devices. And there are ways to do policies that prevent data from being shared, let's say, from, if you use Outlook and Teams, for example, and they're governed by your IS and IT group, we're going to block screen sharing. We're going to block copy paste. You can't take sensitive information out of those applications and paste them into a text message, for example. Next point here, make a small investment to purchase and own as many similar domains to yours as possible. Grab a beer, grab a glass of wine, sit down, go on GoDaddy, grab the corporate credit card and just buy as many domains that look like yours that you can get. I think we have hundreds here at the bank. So, something like Dogwood with 2 zeros instead of 2 O's is a great example. So anything that kind of follows your organizations, bad actors will create emails with a domain that's similar to yours. And if they know who your bank is or they know who your attorney's group is, they will send emails as if they are them and duplicate signatures and such and have that domain just be slightly off. This one here is, I think, an important one for you guys I'm going to guess that most of the firms that are going to listen to this, if you guys have gotten this way through, this is a lot of stuff, or this far through, you probably have a treasury management app that you use with your financial institution. The majority of those can be locked down. We had spoken earlier about IP addresses. You can block and basically whitelist those to your network at your office. So if you only want that treasury management platform where you do wire transfers and ACHs, for example, to be accessible from your office, implement that. I would highly recommend it. What that would do is, God forbid, someone does get your credentials to your treasury management app. through a phishing campaign or some other slip up, it gets posted to the dark web. They would not be able to get into that portal from where they are because they're not on your network. So great tip there. In general, keep your credentials close to your vest. A great example there is your Microsoft 365 credentials. A lot of you probably are on those platforms. It would be the same for, let's say, a G Suite or something. Keep that stuff close to vest, and don't provide your credentials. If you get to a point where someone has shared a SharePoint link or something along those lines, just stop. There's a lot of bad actors that use SharePoint links in order to obtain credentials. So they look like real live SharePoint links. They are, but they take you to a file which you click on that's similar to what Jim had mentioned. And then inside there's a link to then steal your credentials and rinse and repeat the process. Last few ones here, guys, is keeping an eye on the exposure of your personal data. Email address, actually, in specifically, there is a website, again, no endorsement, but Have I Been Pawned? You'll see it on the end of the slide there. You can Google it. It's a really popular website, but it'll check the dark web and see where you've been exposed with your email address and give you some things to run with there to protect yourself, to change passwords and maybe cancel accounts. As far as business goes, being sure to employ or have all employees practice clean desk policies, super easy, right? Just make sure people are not keeping passwords on stickies. We all know this. This is in the learning management stuff we do every time that we all get bored with. Lock in your workstation when it's not in use, right? This one here is a pretty good tip, although it's getting harder to do with AI. Let's say, for example, you have a portal that's Microsoft 365 and you customize it. So it has your firm's logo. It looks really great. It's nice and crisp. When you go to log into Microsoft 365, try to do some additional branding to harden it for bad actors. Like, for example, put a little nugget in the bottom that's text, but it's white, so you can't see it. So maybe a bad actor tries to reproduce your site, but people on your team know that, hey, if I feel suspicious, let me just go down and hover over that white text and see if it pops up anything. Is it foolproof? Absolutely not, especially if AI is in use to duplicate your site, but certainly something to help and keeps people engaged to be like, oh, let me check on that. Keeping all your business and personal devices up to date. I don't think we need to really talk about that, but that's called patch management, right? Thankfully, Apple and Microsoft do this for us really well these days, but don't forget about all your other applications that you have and keeping those up to date. There's lots and lots of vulnerabilities that occur on a daily basis. Um, from a business perspective, decommissioning user accounts, right? Don't take the chance of someone leaving the organization and not decommissioning their account. Put a process in place, a job form, again, no endorsement, but a decommission job form with some steps in it that has a workflow that goes to HR and has to be signed off by a manager to, then go to IT to disable an account and all the additional systems that particular account has access to. Have that follow through for, if you have auditors that come in, things of that nature. Implementing device encryption on all end user workstations. So requiring that not only on workstations, but personal devices before you're going to get access to any email in Teams on your device. You got to have it encrypted and up to, a respectable version of, let's say, iOS or Android. And then lastly, to finish up, guys, when it comes to those similar domains or a domain that you get an email link for, that kind of thing, you can use a thing called an ICANN lookup, which is basically the guys that kind of govern and run the internet. You can go there, look up that domain name for, jimsseminars1.com, and figure out that domain was created yesterday, right? Huge red flag. Never interact with anything that a domain is 30 days old or 10 days old because chances are it's being used for malicious purposes. So yeah, sorry, Jim, to kind of not let you speak there, but I think we got through all the points. I don't know how far over we went, but hopefully not too far.
You did. Todd, thank you so much. This has been so helpful. I appreciate all the work that you did to put this all together today. It's just terrific. Thank you so much.
Yeah, no
And
worries.
that concludes this program, and we'll see you next time. Thanks.
Great. See ya.